Once upon a time, you found yourself in the midst of the dreaded reading slump. Today, we're going to talk about some tips. We're going to have some tricks. We're going to have some strategies to help you get out of that reading slump and back to the reading that you love so much. So sit back, enjoy the quick intro, and we're going to get into it. Hey, welcome back to BellTube, everyone. If you're brand new here, I'm Brian Bell. Now, some of you are going to be regulars of the channel, and some of you may have just kind of Googled how to beat a reading slump, and this video came up as an option for you. Whichever you are, I want to welcome you to the channel, and what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about 10 tips and tricks and strategies that I think will work for some of you, maybe not all of you, but you really have very little to lose because they don't all need to work for you. You just need one, right? So if we list 10 tricks and tips and all you need is one to break out of that reading slump, then I think we've done our job here. I think before we get into the actual tips and suggestions, it's important to think a little bit about root cause. So in other words, you're in a reading slump, or you feel like you've got one coming on, or maybe you've been in one for a while. Can you identify the root cause of your reading slump? Now, for some of you that are in college, it might be kind of an easy answer, right? I mean, if you've been reading a ton for school, recreational reading may not be at the top of your to-do list, even though kind of on a subconscious level you want to. You're just a little burned out with a lot of reading. Well, I've got some tricks for you. I've got some tips that I think might help break out of that. And by the way, if none of these tips or tricks work for you, I'm saving kind of a bonus one, number 11, if you will, for the one for the road that we do at the end of all of our videos that I think might be of use if none of these will work, or if you've tried all of these and they still don't work. The bonus number 11 is going to come at the end. So again, getting back to root cause, if you are in school and you're reading a lot, sure, you could be burned out. Or maybe you've been reading huge epic works. Now, if you're new to the channel, we do a ton of epic fantasy over here, and some of these books are just gigantic chonkers, right? If you go to somebody who's maybe hanging out more in the contemporary fiction, a 400 or 500 page book might seem long, but here in the world of epic fantasy or epic space opera, 500 pages is a blast. We're excited about that because it's a short book. No, we're looking at books that are 600, 700, 800 plus pages. So again, root cause. Have you been reading some gigantic books? We've got some answers here for you too. So while I can't really determine your individual root cause, I think before you start selecting a tip for yourself, it might be worth 5 minutes of your time to sit back and say, can I identify what the root cause of my reading slump is, and go from there. Let's get into some of the tips and tricks. The first one being kind of an obvious one, and some of these you'll have seen on other channels. Some of them I hope are fresh to you, but all of them I think will have my unique take on it. So don't do what I do, and that's typically I'll buzz through a video and try to get all the lists as quick as I can and see what it's about. You're going to miss some context if you do that. So bear with me here. The first tip I'm going to suggest is a common one, and it is to change up your reading genre. Now, if you are a regular at the channel and you're really into fantasy books, maybe switch it off to mystery, maybe switch it off to a crime thriller, maybe go to science fiction, or maybe do something totally out of the ordinary, out of your comfort zone, and think about a topic in life that you've got some interest in outside of the world of fiction, and go for some nonfiction. And really, when I have found that to be beneficial, it's about learning about a topic that I have outside interest in. So I would challenge you to do the same thing. If you are interested in pick a topic, right? There's a nonfiction work about that topic. That might just in itself break your reading slump, because now you're actively reading in something that you're actually interested in the world. You know, reading is often used as escapism, particularly when it comes to fantasy and sci-fi. But if you switch gears a little bit and switch genres over to nonfiction, into a topic that you legitimately have some, budding interest in, it might awaken that reading kind of mojo within you. So tip number one, switch up the genre, but really within that tip, try to think about some nonfiction topics that you've got a little bit of curiosity in. I think you're going to find some value there. Let's move on. The second tip is one that I don't really do myself a lot, but I think it can be very powerful for some of you, and that's rereading a favorite book. Why? Because there's a little bit of a comfort zone. And when you're going through reading burnout, sometimes it's like you don't want to learn all these new characters. You don't want to learn all these new geographies. You don't want to try to suss out what's happening. You just kind of want to feel comfy again. And rereading an old favorite might very well do the trick. Now, it's certainly going to be an active read, especially if it's a book that you haven't read in a long time, but there's going to be some familiarity to it, which can also lead your mind to crack through that reading slump a little bit. So rereading an old favorite, or maybe even rereading a newer favorite, might just do the trick. I hope so. Let's move on to the third one. Now, this third tip I've seen on many channels before, and I think it's a good one, and it's there for good reason, and that's to pick up some short story collections or some novellas. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you read big epic stuff, right, it's pretty amazing when you take a look at a novella that's, 90 pages or 115 pages, or a collection of short stories where maybe the longest one is 50 pages. It's kind of like putting on the training wheels again for reading, even though some of the most fantastic works of fiction you're going to find in novellas and in short stories. When an author has the talent to put in essentially an entire novel's worth of work into like a handful of pages, there's something of beauty that I've found to really appreciate in a short story. And that alone, or maybe a combination of short stories, might help break out of the reading slump, particularly if you normally read big books, and especially if you read big physical copies. Because when you look at a giant doorstop, in my day we actually used to have phone books, right, that were like this big. When you're looking at a gigantic Stormlight Archive book from Brandon Sanderson, that comes in at 1,200, 1,300 pages, as compared to something that's like 36 pages, it's a little bit more motivating to want to get up and do that rather than not even making a tiniest little chunk in a 1,300 page book. If you read 30 pages, you're not even really probably even reading a chapter. So short stories, novellas, that's our tip number 3. Let's move on. All right, now tip number 4 is going to be almost the opposite of what I just told you, right? And so like I said at the beginning, these aren't for everybody. All you need to do is find one that works for you. That's the beauty of this kind of a list. The fourth item I want to share with you today is to chunk it down into small, manageable amounts of reading. So if you are reading a gigantic book, or really even if you're reading a kind of a normal page book, instead of looking at it like, I want to get this thing done in a week, or I want to get this thing done in a handful of days. And particularly for you YouTubers out there, booktubers, that put these gigantic books on your TBR and then try to suss out, how am I going to get this all done by the end of the month so I can do a monthly wrap up? What I would suggest here is to just make some incremental progress. And, this tip is really all about chunking it down and making some real small goals so at least you're slowly moving forward. We're all about little small chunks over here on the channel where you can build them up and you can compound them. And yeah, you know what? If you can just read 30 pages and you do it for a week, that's 210 pages. See, now you're learning basic math on BellTube. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, small chunks, make smaller goals for yourself so you do get that feeling of accomplishment. You set out to at least do something, you did it, you moved on, maybe you focus off of reading for a little bit, but knowing that, yeah, I got a little bit done today, and that's better than if I would have done nothing at all. Set some smaller goals. Now, one of the newer things that I've found for myself that really works is our 5th tip today, and that's joining a book club. Now, the internet makes it so much easier to join a book club because if you are on BookTube at all, you know that there are so many Discord accounts that are out there. And almost all of them at any given time are all reading a book. And there's something about, for me, a shared experience when you're reading a book. And sometimes the people that are reading along with you have read it before. And so it's even better because if you've got questions or there's something that's just not adding up in your mind, you've got somebody on a Discord that can answer that question for you, that isn't going to spoil the book. Because so many times when we're kind of in isolation, or if we're just kind of a solitary person and we want to learn more about a book we're reading, we got to be really careful about Googling that book, right? Because all of a sudden a result comes up, the first thing that spoils and ruins the entire book for you. These Discord servers can work particularly well, both for people that are reading a book for the first time as a club, and also for somebody who's rereading it that might be joining you, that knows kind of what you're going through in that story and will be very cautious and very careful not to wreck your experience of the story. So then you ask yourself, okay, well, what Discord do I do? If you're new to Discord, I would suggest finding a smaller one. So some of my friends host one called the Fireside Discord. I'll link it in the description. And it's kind of a manageable size Discord. There's only about 300 members at the moment. And they organize it in such a way that if you're new to Discord, it's pretty easy to navigate. Now, if you are very familiar with how Discord works, I can't think of a better one than Mike's Book Reviews. Mike has, I don't know how many tens of thousands, it might even be over 100,000 people on his Discord now. And every topic under the sun as it relates to fantasy and science fiction and even far beyond that is available on his Discord. And I am pretty confident that you're going to find a book club somewhere in that Discord of really anything that you've got interest in. So joining a book club can be fun. It can be a group activity. It also can be something that if, like I said, you're a solitary person, but you want a little bit of a human connection, it brings that into your reading, which creates kind of like a interpersonal relationship that we don't always have as readers. I hope that tip works great for you. Let's move on to the next one. The next tip is kind of a simple one. A lot of you do this already. I know I do, and that's to listen to audiobooks. Now, one of the things that I hear all the time from reader friends of mine is, well, I just can't do audiobooks. I can't do it. I can't track it. I lose kind of my focus. 5 or 10 minutes will go by and I've basically spaced out and I don't know where we are in the story. I get that. For me personally, I don't do very complicated material by audiobook. So I'm probably never going to read gigantic epic fantasy or space opera in audio. However, there are some audiobooks that lend themselves very, very well. There are some genres that lend themselves very, very well to audiobooks. litrpg does really well for audiobooks. Autobiographies, particularly if the person who wrote the autobiography actually narrates it themselves. And you'll find that there's a lot of, if you're into music at all, there's quite a few music autobiographies from rock stars or bands or actors or public figures that you may find that you can follow along very easily in an audio form, way better than doing epic fantasy because you're just basically listening to a conversation. So I think audiobooks can make a difference. I know they do for me. There's plenty of times I don't feel like sitting down and reading, but I have no problem popping in the earbuds and listening to a great story. Whether it be fiction, whether it be nonfiction, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, audiobooks count. Just because you're not reading with your eyes, you're still engaging with the story. I don't know if reading with your ears is, humanly possible, but who cares? It's still reading, you're listening, you're comprehending the story. Audiobooks, a fantastic option if you haven't tried it yet. Another tip, again, I don't use this one too much, but I know it's worked for a lot of people, and that's to get out of the written word completely and go to something like manga or graphic novels or even comic books. Why? Because the visual aspect in our brains translates the story quite a bit differently than just reading words. So yeah, you're still reading, it's still doing something that you enjoy, but you don't feel burned out trying to digest long paragraphs. You're watching a story unfold in a graphic style. It's sort of like combining a TV show and a movie with a book when you get into a graphic novel or a manga. Again, this one doesn't really resonate with me personally, but I know for a fact it has worked marvels for a lot of people. And again, in this reading kind of bookish community, you'll find a ton of people that are into graphic novels. You'll find a ton of people that are into manga. If you just do a basic YouTube search and put either one of those terms in the search bar, I promise you, you are going to find a haven of people that are all into that. They'll show you where to start better than I can. Again, bringing a graphic story into your mind without having to go through the filter of words might break that reading slump. I hope that trick works for you. One of the reading slump tricks that worked so well for me last year, and it gets back to what I was talking about earlier in joining a Discord, is to participate in a read-along or some type of a reading contest or a reading competition. It might fire up a little bit different energy than if you're just kind of casually reading a book for the sake of reading a book. If you're on a team and you want your team to win, you might just get a little bit more energy, a little bit more gusto to pick up the book and read. You might also feel a little peer pressure, and maybe that's a good thing from time to time, that you don't want to let your team down. So I would suggest a read along. I like reading competitions. If you don't find a particular readathon, that's going on at any given time, then look for some challenges. Do a basic YouTube search on book challenges and see if any of them appeal to you. If they do, that might break you out of a reading slump. If you don't find anything, or if this one doesn't make sense, and again, it doesn't have to, we're just looking for one tip today that's going to break you out of your reading slump. If that's it, fantastic. If it's not, let's move on to the next one. All right, our ninth reading tip today is one that I use all the time, and that is to create a cozy or comfortable reading environment for yourself. Now, this can be done in a couple of different ways. This can be done physically, which we're going to get more into in our 10th tip, but it also can be done in more of a sensory way. And what do I mean by that? Well, do you have a scented candle that you can light? Sometimes fragrance and a particular smell can bring us into the mode of reading because it sets the ambiance a little bit. Do you ever have a screen going, like a monitor, or maybe even on your phone? There are some tremendous ambient reading backgrounds available on YouTube. I'm going to link some in the description. I don't have anything to do with any of those ambient channels. They're just some of my personal favorites. And some of them are like, you're sitting in a log cabin and it's pouring rain and you hear a little bit of thunder, way off in the distance. Or maybe you're sitting on a beach in Hawaii and the Pacific Ocean is coming in and going out at whatever speed you find on the internet that makes sense for you. So creating a cozy reading environment is something that I do both when I'm in a reading slump and also when I'm not in a reading slump, and that might actually help me from getting into a reading slump in the first place. I love creating the environments that I'm in. I think that's why I used to own a nightclub for so long, is I just really enjoy creating environments. I think it's something that you ought to try if you've not tried it before. Let's move on to the next one. All right, the 10th one today is all about mixing up your reading routine. Now, I have found that for a lot of readers, they tend to read at the same time of day or the same day of the week, or sort of maybe right before bed or maybe right when they get up in the morning, but they have a bit of a routine. Now, generally speaking, I like routines because they turn into habits, and habits basically lead us to where we're going to go in life, so long as they're good ones. But when you're in a slump, something has to change, right? We have to break out of where we're at. And breaking routine can activate different parts of your brain that re-energize to do some of the activities that you may not kind of feel like doing at the moment. I'll give you another example, like going to the gym, right? If you go to the gym at the same time every day and then you get into a physical fitness slump and you don't feel like going anymore, I challenge you to go at a totally different time. Go first thing in the morning. Or if you normally don't work out on the weekends, go work out. It just changes something in your mind that brings back a little bit more enthusiasm, a little bit more excitement, because you're doing something out of the ordinary that your brain is completely used to. The same applies here to reading. If you just normally read at the end of the day before you go to bed, try to pick a different time of day to get a few pages in. Your brain is subconsciously going to say to you, what are you doing? This isn't our time to read. And that's exactly what we're going for. We're trying to interrupt patterns here because the patterns have burned you out. So what we want to do is we want to interrupt those patterns. We want to put in some good reading. We want to get your brain interested in stories again, that when the time comes that you want to go back into your normal time of reading, into your normal routine, it's easy and it's simple, and you can slide right back into it because enough of that routine has been broken that it's reactivated some enthusiasm. Let's move on to the last one, and this is our one for the road today. This is actually the bonus one, and I think it's a really valuable one and an important one, and that is sometimes when you are on a reading slump or a slump of any kind, today's one for the road is roll with it and take a break. You are not required to be reading unless you're like in school or unless reading is an integral component of your job. For most of us here, reading is supposed to be for recreation, for fun, to learn a little bit more about life, but we're not under the gun to do it. And one of the biggest things that I've seen people do in where they jump into reading slumps and how to break out is sometimes just take a break from reading altogether. It might be a day. If you read voraciously and you just take a day off, that might do it. For some of us, it's a little bit longer, right? If you just finish up, and it sort of depends a little bit on what the root cause was that we talked about at the beginning of the video. If the root cause was you just read a series so spectacular that you're almost on a book hangover and you can't think about reading right now because you can't get that last experience out of your head, then you just need to ask yourself, all right, how much time do I need to allow myself to process what I've just read before getting into a new story? For some of us, that might just be a couple of days. For some of us, that might be a week or two. Whatever it is, there is no sense in the world of guilting yourself for taking some time off to give yourself a mental break. If you look at the best premier athletes in the world, right? They practice more than anybody. They do their tasks better and more often than all of us combined. But you know what? They have an off season too. They take breaks. They take vacations. And a lot of us, because reading is sort of an easy hobby to do anywhere, right? I mean, you could do it on your phone and everyone's walking around on the phone these days. It's harder to kind of take that break, and sometimes it's required. So if none of those first 10 tips worked, I think this one for the road and letting the break happen is fine. It might be the best tip that you got out of today, because sooner or later, whatever drove you to be a reader in the first place will activate again. I've never, ever heard of somebody who went into a reading slump and never picked up a book again. It's absolutely my pleasure to share with you some of these things that I've gone through in life that have helped me both in reading and in other activities. If you like what I've talked about here today, if you think that this is a video that you might want to save kind of in the back of your mind or put in your favorites category, just in case you ever need it, go ahead and do that. I also would really appreciate it if you hit the like button. That helps more people who might be in a reading slump see this video, the more likes it gets. And of course, if you've been to the channel before, or maybe you want to see what I get up to, as we talk about actual books, consider subscribing to the channel. That would be fun too. We'd love to have you part of our community. I hope you found some great value here today. Leave a comment if you've experienced a reading slump before and what it took for you to break out of it. Or leave a comment comment if you're currently in a reading slump. We have an amazing community here at BellTube, and I promise you, not only will I directly answer you, but I bet you there's a good chance other people in our community will chime in with some helpful tips, maybe some tricks that are specific to your particular needs. We want everybody up and reading again and having a great time doing it. Again, thanks for watching the video, you guys. Here's your fortune.